Hi, everyone. A very warm welcome to all the participants, and thank you so much for joining us today on Valentine's Day. We're going to talk about pricing. Um, and of course, before we sort of get started, a quick introduction to the panelists here. My name is Ricky Sundrani. I'm a partner with the pricing assurance practice at Everest Group. Lead some of our work in the area of price IT services, price and solution benchmarking, and based out of our UK office. I am joined by my colleagues Rahul and Chitika. If you want to quickly introduce yourselves, please.
Thanks, Ricky. Hi, everyone. Great to be in touch. My name is Rahul Barve, Vice President with Everest Group and part of the same team as Ricky, Pricing Assurance. I lead some of the engagements on the BPO side, on the consulting services side, and help enterprise with sourcing advisory work. Shitika?
Thanks, Rahul. Hi, everyone. My name is Shritika Jain. I'm a practice director at the pricing assurance practice with Everest Group. Been with the firm for more than 3 years now, and I take care of anything that's to do with applications and consulting advisory from a commercial standpoint. Like Rahul, I'm also based out of our Delhi NCR office in India, and happy to be on this session today. And I think people are joining from all parts of the globe, so really excited to be part of this conversation. Over to you, Ricky.
Awesome. Thanks, Shatika. And before we get started, would love to know more from the audience in terms of where are they tuning in from and how is the weather looking like. It's gray and cloudy as is always the case in London, so can't complain about it. Um, so today, of course, so we Everest Group does a key issues survey at the beginning of every year or kind of the end of the last year, and this year as well when we did it, not surprisingly, cost and margin pressures actually turned out to be the number one business objective that enterprises were chasing. So, right, not surprisingly, given that we sort of had this was the number one business objectives for them last year as well, so it's sort of remained consistent. It's just the sentiment of the market right now. So cost and margin pressure, slowing demand, and adopting to evolving customer needs were kind of rounded the top three business objectives for them. And thus, 2024 is going to be about what we believe as doing more with less, right? It's sort of you want to drive your revenue, but also sort of try to enhance your profitability. So, how do you meet those two conflicting objectives? And we're going to specifically talk about the second point today, which is really around improving bottom lines. And for us, we strongly believe that outsourcing cost is a major driver for that. And for that to happen, enterprises really need to have a firm hand on how much are they paying and what are they paying for outsourcing costs. They need to exactly know how much should they be paying and what pricing changes to agree to, right? Of course, this gets a bit compounded by macroeconomic troubles around the world that we're seeing in Eastern Europe, Western Asia, rising inflation across major global economies. It doesn't seem to be going down anytime sooner. And compounded by the fact that there is a bit of predatory pricing as well that have started to see out, given sort of a soft pipeline in some cases. This one thing seems to be quite clear that providers will find it a bit hard to get clients to agree to any bill rate increases this year. So this brings us to the topic of today, where we're going to focus on how can we help, what does the pricing index entail, and how are some of your peers using this pricing index to help them with their sourcing decisions. But before we kind of deep dive into it, the plan for today is to kind of quickly talk about a background into what the pricing index is, how is it used to understand, how can it be used to understand the pricing change in outsourcing services, some historical pricing movement and outlook for 2024 through this report, through the lens of this report, and how are some of your peers or other companies using pricing index to help them with their sourcing decisions. And finally, we'll also talk about some other themes which are expected to impact pricing this year. Of course, Gen AI cannot have a conversation without Gen AI these days, right? The big elephant in the room. So let's get started, and I'll hand it over to Rahul to get us started with that.
Thanks,
And
Ricky.
sorry, I think I one thing is that we also offering a primer, sort of a primer which covers recent interesting deal examples and market developments. If you're interested, please use the link in the chat to access it, and we'll share a copy of that. Sorry, over to you, Rahul.
Thanks, Ricky. So before we dive into the actual price changes using the pricing index report, let me provide a quick overview of the pricing index itself, right? So this index we essentially had launched, last year, and we plan to launch the H2 2023 report, next week. And it will be, of course, available for download complimentary basis for everyone, right, who has joined and even otherwise. What does the pricing index entail, right? So it essentially covers three component. If you can get the slide on. Yeah, so it essentially covers three components. The first one being the actual historical price movement for the past 12 months. So essentially, if we talk of pricing index for H2 2023, we will cover the average pricing for H2 2023 compared to a year back, right, which is H2 2022, and it will be provided as an index, right? The second component is essentially the projected price movement for next 12 months is something that it will cover, where it will provide a forecasted view of the pricing index for H2 2024, right? So 12 months from now. And the third component that it essentially covers is three most important pricing themes that you need to watch out for in the near future, which will impact the overall pricing. So these insights will be covered across three outsourcing service categories, right? The first one, the IT standard services, which essentially includes the traditional IT applications such as development and maintenance on standard technologies like Java, .NET, etc. Infrastructure services, more of the traditional ones, like traditional compute, service desk, and storage kind of activities. The second service category essentially it covers is the IT advanced services, which essentially are the higher skilled IT application areas like DevOps, data science, full stack developer, etc., or even infrastructure services like cybersecurity, containers, or cloud services, right? And the last service category is essentially the BPO services, which include some of the common voice and back office BPO services like accounts payable, accounts receivable, your customer service, claims processing kind of work. The pricing index will essentially cover six delivery locations. So two onshore locations, US and UK, two nearshore locations, Poland and Mexico, and lastly the two offshore locations of India and Philippines, right? And it will cover the three components that I just talked about across each of these three categories. Okay, so I think, and of course, the audience would be interested to understand what is the actual price changes, right? But before that, Ricky, should we check with the audience about some of the price changing numbers?
Oh, yes, great idea. Absolutely. So, I'll request the audience to share in their perspectives on what do they believe will be the forecast for 2024 in terms of pricing changes. Just a quick response in terms of will it remain flat or will it increase or will it go down? So, uh, and then of course we'll reveal our set of analysis and what do we believe about the market per se. And while we're waiting for the response from the audience, very I just wanted to understand from you, Rahul. Are there situations where uh, this pricing index may not actually may not be directly be useful for us?
So definitely, pricing index currently, is to provide a more directional sense of how pricing has moved or will move in the near future, right? And how this whole index, right, that was designed. The whole intention and in fact the potential of this index is to even replace the COLA indices, right, that we see in the cost of living adjustment indices that we see in the contracts, right? So currently, as you know, most of the current indices are more linked to the cost, or even salary indices rather than they are connected to the price, right?
Okay.
So as a as a buyer, right, I would actually want my contracts to be linked to market price, right, and not the cost, right. And another use case that we see of how it could be, how it is, used by enterprises, is to also do the budgeting activities, right, from their overall, so for their overall outsourcing portfolio, if they want to understand, okay, what should be their next budget, right, that they would want to align, their resources internally. That's where the expected price change in the next 12 months would be helpful, right. So these are some of the areas where price index is used and currently is being used by the providers. But to coming to your question, right, uh, I do believe that some of the price index cannot be used for actual negotiations, or even from a contracting standpoint, right. And for that we would actually require a more detailed benchmarking exercise, right. And the reason essentially is, like whenever you are looking for negotiation or you're going for contracting, right, you would need to baseline your pricing against the market, right, based on your operating environment,
Mm.
right, and overall scenario, right. So for example, let's say, if you're already paying high prices, ideally you may not be fine agreeing to a price increase, right, for whatever reason, right, the market conditions, inflation, etc., right. So you will first need to understand, right, where you lie in the overall pricing spectrum, right, and accordingly negotiate, right. So yeah, I mean, in short, enterprises, service providers are using price index to kind of get that directional sense, right, and you
Okay.
can't really use for the overall negotiation.
So in a way, you're saying is that it's very relative, and my definition of what 100 means for me would be very different from what another client might be paying, given their context of the contract.
Correct, correct. That's correct.
Got it. All right. I think let's do the big reveal, and Shitika, why don't you talk us through in terms of what have we really seen over the last 12 months or so, and what is it that we expect for the next 12 months?
Right, Vicky. So I'll go a little backwards from, the last 12 months itself, because the pricing dynamics have been quite fast changing in the past few years at least. It might not be the same, 10 years um, earlier, but we have seen that change happening quite so frequently in the recent past. So if we happen to reflect on the journey post-COVID era, that was the phase where the demand for IT services experienced a significant surge. And this surge led to an expansion in the pricing, and this trend persisted till the early part of at least 2022. Now, this was also driven by enterprises seeking to diversify their portfolios to meet the demands that were coming in through, various business units. However, when we come to the later half of 2022, a slight shift began to emerge, which was, while the demand remains strong, early discussions about stagnation, recession started surfacing, and although these were not very strong sentiments back then, but definitely the price impact started to be there. In fact, I remember service providers continue to report a very healthy deal pipeline despite the onset of the war that happened in Ukraine. But not very later to that, the global market witnessed hyperinflation. There was energy crisis impacting almost all of the Europe back then, and all of this impacted then to the interest rate hikes in a lot of at least the major geographies, major countries. And we did see all of this translating into some or the other sort of commercial impact and eventual discussions. Now, coming to 2023, the talent market, which had was otherwise very strained due to high demand, eventually began to stabilize to some extent. And the global economy did face a sustained slowdown, and there was definitely a shift in the buying buyer priorities. So we did see in the last 12 months that conversations around cost management, margin pressures, productivity, although this used to be a very important parameter for buyer seller discussions, but there was definitely a more focused discussion around overall efficiency and productivity. Now, with that background on the ever evolving market dynamic in place, let me also talk about the pricing index for IT and BPO services. So, like Rahul mentioned a few minutes back, this covers the price movement over the past 12 months and also the future trends for the next 12 months across six key delivery locations. So, the prices that were prevalent in H2 of 22 are indexed to a base of 100, and the next 12 months of the price movement is provided in terms of an index. Now, what you see on the screen, for example, the prices for IT standard services have an average movement of 0.9% for USA compared to what it was in H2 of 22. Now, for the IT advanced services, obviously this price change is a little higher, about 2 to 4% on an average. But we also have to think of the fact that these are the skills which used to earlier command a greater price movement back in 22, 21. Yeah. So that's the kind of market sentiments that also gets reflected in the price change that we're seeing. So, besides the historic movement, we also provide a futuristic outlook into the pricing for these services. Overall, if I have to make a comment, the price movement is anticipated to be muted compared to what we saw in the last 12 months. In fact, for locations like India and US, the price for standard skills are anticipated to reduce marginally. Now, we anticipate that going forward, the buyer negotiations are more likely to revolve around various factors, including, say, the competition that's at hand, what kind of historic service quality that's been there with the vendor organization, and the ability to tie pricing to, say, the output or the outcome of the deal itself. And very naturally, so to say, the extent of the buyer's expenditure will in fact dictate the future pricing adjustments. Now, while the outlook for advanced IT services look flattish compared to the reduction in pockets that we saw for standard skills, Rahul, one observation is around the BPO services. Now, the outlook that we see for UK looks out of the ordinary to me. What do you think is the impact that's leading to such an outlook?
No, thanks, Shitika. Right. So before going into UK specifically, right, let me just cover the pricing trend that we have seen for the overall BPO services, right. So like you mentioned, for the IT standard services, the overall pricing for BPO services has also remained quite muted, right. So if you look at the specific geographies, right, and let me first talk about US here, we observed that the pricing has been quite flattish, right, with just almost 0.6% increase in the pricing compared to almost 3%, right, that we had seen when we had released a similar report last year, right. And this is largely because because of some price decrease that we observed in US, especially in H2 2023, and compared to some increases that we had observed in H1 2023. Even if I talk of the future outlook, for US, we do forecast that there would be essentially a price decline, right, to the tune of minus 0.5% on an average, because of the weak economic climate and the overall cost pressure that we are seeing across some of the enterprises.
Hmm.
Now coming to UK specifically here,
So,
right, and
uh,
yeah.
Rahul, just as a kind of you talk about the historical trends and the future forecast, there was a question from the audience in terms of specifically understanding where would HR services, HRO would fit into that BPO services spectrum, and where would you sort of place that?
Yeah, so I mean the HR, so of course, right, within HRO also, right, you have got a lot of the transactional services, right, like the HR help desk specific areas, or even some of the activities like, let's say, payroll processing kind of activities, right? So that's where some of those activities I would place in this index that we have given, right, on the BPO services. However, some of the high end activities, right, within HR, right, whether it is related to, let's say, learning and development, content creation specific activities, or even some of the HR consulting, HR analytics specific areas, right? That's where some of those pricing index, those pricing changes would be slightly on the higher side compared to the index that we have provided.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, and I think you were saying something about the UK. Why does it stand out compared to some of the other markets?
Correct. Yes. So I think UK has been slightly different, right? So we did see a decent price increase in the last 12 months, right? So close to what, almost 1.6% increase on an average that we saw, and this is essentially owing to some of the higher inflation, and specifically there was an increase in the national minimum wage, right? That we seen last year for UK. And despite this is again despite all the higher pricing pressure that we are talking about, right, earlier, right? So that's where we have seen a higher increase. And even if I talk of going forward, right, in terms of a futuristic forecast for UK, we do expect that the pricing for UK can increase to the tune of almost 2 to 3%, right, in the next 12 months. And again, tying this back to the expected increase in the national minimum wage, or even the national living age, to the tune of 9 to 10%, right, that we are expecting in April. So that's why a lot of service provider are kind of revising, especially for contact center services, right, where some of the like where the salaries, right, could come quite close to the minimum wage, or might be slightly above the minimum wage, right, as a starting salary. So that's where some of the salary service providers are looking to revise, and that essentially is kind of impacting the pricing, right? So we do expect that aberration for UK. Having said that, for other geographies like India or US, we do expect, right, price decline, right? So I think some of those regulations like minimum wage, right, can impact some of those pricing, right? That's something that our audience should be
Got
mindful
it.
of going forward.
In fact, we have a number of questions coming in specifically on contact centers. I think you touched upon BPO, or so you specifically touched upon CCO in the UK. What about CCO in some of the other offshore markets, which are predominantly like the Philippines, or even some of the nearshore markets which deliver to the US?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, overall, CCO services, has seen a lot of impact, right, across geographies. In fact, if I compare, contact center services, right, with a lot of other back office services like, finance and accounting, or let's say in healthcare, claims processing, or, claim processing, insurance, right. Certainly, we do see a lot of pressure on the pricing on the contact center services, right, across locations, whether it is US or Philippines, or for that matter India, compared to a lot of the other BPO services, right? So I'll actually put the contact center index, right, if I were to kind of design one, right, slightly lower than the BPO price index that we have
Got it. Okay.
currently put in. However, just one caveat there, right? So we need to be mindful of some of the regulations, right, government regulations as well, considering the overall inflation that we are seeing across markets. There are a lot of governments are re-looking at their minimum wages, right, and that's something, some of like
Yeah.
the example of UK that we just mentioned, right, some of the others like Poland, right, where we could see some of the impact as well, right? So that's something that the audience should be mindful of as well.
Got it. I think one more question from the audience was related to, I think we showed the spectrum of IT advanced services. Would something like SAP or ERP transformation platforms also sit within that bucket?
Let me take that, Ricky. So it's not surprising that we get this question quite often, because the positioning of any ERP platform, say SAP, Oracle, etc., can depend on various factors like what demand that particular product is seeing, what's the availability of resources, and many other factors into play. Now, if we speak, for example, specifically on SAP, ABAP and bases end up in the standard service categorization because of their lower price positioning. These technologies have been there for quite some time. So there's no demand supply mismatch. All of these factors come into aspect when the pricing, how do you really associate the pricing? On the other hand, if I have to talk about HANA or success factor, these are more premium offering, and hence the right index to look at would be the advanced services because of the comprehensive features that they offer, advanced capabilities, so on and so forth. And a similar connotation also holds true for Oracle. Something like a PeopleSoft is standard services in terms of pricing. However, if you have to see the index and associate to a price movement, for something like HCM Cloud or in fact CX Cloud for that matter, IT advanced services should be the right index to look at.
Got it. Okay. And I think interesting question again is that from the audience is that in terms of what about where would you sort of how does the pricing index that we just offered, how does it look like across different industries or different industry verticals?
Yeah, I can probably take that, right? So, we do observe, some of the variations across different industries in terms of the pricing, right? However, the pricing index, right, currently how we have, kind of designed it, is to kind of provide a overall directional sense, right? That's where we have made it industry agnostic, right? So, the insights which we have covered, right, and even when the price index report is released, right, and you would have access to it. The insights essentially are covered across different industries. Yeah. Having said that, if I were to talk about and give some insights on industries, right, in the last 6 to 12 months, I would say some of the industry verticals like telecom, or even let's say high tech, and in to some extent even banking, right, we have seen a relatively higher pricing pressure, right, across some of these industries, and that's where some of the pricing index numbers could come slightly
Okay.
lower for some of these areas. And some of the sectors like insurance for that matter, or even healthcare, and to some extent even utilities, right, that's where I would say relatively lower pricing pressure, a lot of deal pipeline is still strong, right, and that's where I would put that some of that pricing index slightly on the higher side, right,
Got
for
it.
them.
I think banking probably sort of it was reflected in the SVB crisis that we saw last year, and the demand was quite muted in that particular segment, I suppose. Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe I think we covered standard IT services, advanced IT services, and BPO services. What about something like consulting, more of something like management consulting, or even things like tax advisory, accounting, audit, all of those? Because enterprises do end up spending a significant amount of money on the management consultants, or even their audit and accounting partners for that matter. Where do you think that the rates for those sort of expertise has changed over the last 1 year or so?
So, for consulting services too, Ricky, I think what we have seen in the past 12 months and even the forward-looking outlook, it's going to be muted because, again, due to the market sentiments that's there, there are cost pressures. In fact, a lot of pushback from clients are seen on the existing rate cards when it comes to management consulting, strategy consulting. There are, in fact, clear mandates for global firms to reassess the consulting spend, which in turn is leading to an expectation to have a more transparent pricing in place. So, unlike a couple of years back, where black box sort of a pricing used to be offered, that's no more a case because
Got it.
enterprises are looking out to deep dive into the rate cards, understand how utilization or FT based rate cards can be further optimized. So, all in all, the price movement is anticipated to be lower than the change we saw in the last year. The impact would, however, be more pronounced for services that are associated with the discretionary spending for
Got it.
enterprises. In fact, if I have to make a comment, something like tech consulting and large transformation services most likely are going to continue to be the focus area for most of the companies.
Yeah.
Rahul, would you like to add something from the risk consulting standpoint?
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, even on the risk consulting side, and even let's say the managed services areas, like audit, assurance, and even tax services, we are seeing similar trend, right? So if I look at the price change for the last 12 months, it has been quite flat, right? Quite muted, but I would say still positive. It's not like it has kind of declined significantly. However, going forward, we do expect a possible decline, right? Considering some of the trends that you already mentioned, right, around discretionary spend for enterprises. In fact, even on the BPO side, right, a lot of companies are looking at consulting services or ad hoc projects, right, that they are doing. We are seeing a lot of pricing pressure on some of those spend. In fact, enterprises are asking for the service provider to invest in some of those, and try to look at maybe something like a business outcome kind of an construct, right? So that's also something that we are seeing. But all in all, yeah, definitely a
Okay.
lot of pressure on the professional services pricing, right?
I think there's a question from Abhiram in the audience, and it's a very interesting question. I think something that we sort of will really like is that, given that, I mean, the changes and of course the pricing from a rate card perspective are quite minimal or very muted per se, but because of the impact of Gen AI or advanced automation, do you see a major impact happening at an overall deal TCV level or the quantum of work level? And why, Rahul, why don't you talk a bit more about what do you see on the BPO side, and Chitika and I can talk a bit more about on the IT side.
Yeah, yeah. I was actually waiting for a question on Gen AI, right? I mean, a LinkedIn discussion without topic of Gen AI, I think would not be a complete, right? But again, jokes apart, right? So definitely, right? I mean, a lot of service provider are aggressively investing in even pitching Gen AI projects, right, to their new and existing clients, or even for a long duration or large deals, right, in the BPO side. That's something that we are seeing a lot of clients kind of pitching. However, to be honest, in terms of the kind of productivity benefits, right, that we would have we would have observed, right, that's something that we have still not really seen, right, a very high productivity benefits. Yes, there are some incremental productivity benefits that we are seeing in terms of increase. But still, I think service providers currently are also kind of maturing in this particular space, right? Looking at the right use cases, right? So as to create a overall higher impact, right, and ROI. And that's where we do believe that some of these productivity commitments because of Gen AI would solidify going forward, probably in the next 12 months, and even increase further,
Yeah,
right? So yeah, I mean, I would have expected more in terms of the overall high, but yeah, still seeing incremental productivity being provided.
got it. On the on the cloud, data center, digital workplace services, an area which I kind of track, I think I would go out on a stand and say that typically, at least we've started to see in a lot of cases vendors commit to a 5 to 15% increase in productivity, incremental productivity gains due to Gen AI related or advanced AI, advanced automation related use cases alone. So earlier it used to, let's say earlier it was 25% over a 5 year deal period. Now there's an additional 5 to 15% incremental productivity gain over a 5 year period because of these things. So I think, to answer your question, yes, definitely there will be some sort of an impact on the overall deal quantum, but then there's also a conversation to be had in terms of, will providers also make incremental revenues from working with their clients to implement some of these use cases and manage it for them on an ongoing basis. So these are both sides of the equation. We have one more question from Deborah Osborne, and then she asks us about, what about price reduction, cost takeouts based on talent demands, high supply, low? I think very interestingly, what we've observed is that talent, and I think I'm going back to this key issues survey that we kind of do at the beginning of every year. And we spoke about the fact that price and cost pressure is the number one business objective for enterprises going in 2024. Surprisingly, and no, in fact, not surprisingly, in the same research, talent came out at number 7. So, and it used to be at number 1 in 2022. It was a number one business objective for enterprises in 2022, because we were going through the market where it was typically a very strong employees market. It was what we call as a sellers market, right? But it has things have moved from there considerably. Talent fell to number 7 on the business objectives ranking for enterprises this year. And that is the reason why we believe, and I would probably the talent excellence team at Everest Group might not agree with this, but I think the talent situation has gotten much better compared to what it was 2 years before. So we're not seeing a lot of pressure or pricing pressure because of talent situation alone. But definitely cost takeout is a very major business objective for a lot of enterprises going through 2024 now. uh, Having said that, cost is not the only thing that enterprises are looking at, right? They're also looking at things like innovation, right? Things such as delivery quality. So no client will be willing to compromise or get lower cost at the expense of quality. So they want both. That's the problem of duality that we're trying to solve for this year, right? They want good quality at lower prices, which is a very conflicting problem to solve for at this stage. What's driving this talent falling? I think interesting. I think, of course, the talent situation has stabilized. Multiple reasons, right? And I'm sure the talent excellence team at Everest Group can actually talk a bit better about this. But given there's been a lot of upskilling initiatives going on in the service provider organizations, I think a lot of companies, a lot of service providers hired more than what they needed to through 2022 and 2023. So they're kind of still utilizing some of that. So it's not to say that, basically to saying that the new demand is for talent is going down, but they're still service providers are still utilizing the talent that they have on their benches in their organizations. The utilization rate for FTEs, which we track at service providers, is kind of pretty high. So they're making use of the talent that they already have on their payrolls. Um,
Yeah. And just to add a comment to that, right? So we are not saying that it has like significantly completely subsided and there's no discussion around talent at all, right? And of course there's a lot of discussion around talent. It's just that the quantum that we saw probably early part of 2023 or even 2022, right? I think that's certainly has subsided, right? So even if I talk of specific areas, right, in the nearshore geographies, right,
mm,
let's say for FNA services, we do see some challenge around talent. There are of course specific skill sets, whether it is clinical specific resources in Philippines or in our even in US kind of geographies. We do see I mean some of those uh, issues, right, in kind of getting the right talent and sometimes pricing higher because of that, right? However, yes, I mean compared to the previous situation, certainly it has subsided.
Got it. Um, I think so. We also wanted to talk a bit about an actual case study and a client which has kind of used this pricing index sort of a concept very useful. I mean, they've used it pretty well in their organization to make sourcing decisions. So, Shitika, can you talk a bit more about this particular case study?
Right. Ricky, do you want to bring up that slide?
Yes, yes. Actually, yes. Let's use.
Sure. So while we so far have discussed upon the benefits of using the price index as a tool for pricing conversation, this here is a case study where this would talk about how global enterprises are leveraging a more nuanced form of this data, say for either doing their budget planning, the spend forecasting, or even taking some sort of business decisions. Now, we have been doing this custom study for many enterprises around price projections for some time now. These are in most scenarios, if not all, clients with global presence, and typically they have very large scale of operations. Now, the utility of such a study to them would be to use the data for a quick current spend analysis, or just to get a very prudent estimation of the future spend with their service providers, and vendor organizations. Now, this one is a recent example where we engaged with a US-based technology company that was interested in the historic and futuristic price movement. Now, this was very contextual to their outsourcing landscape. The services, the skill categorization, the location combination, the billing currency, all of these were taken into consideration for providing them a very pointed price projection that could be directly used and put into play. Now, in such scenarios, what becomes very important is the baselining. And our price projection modeling takes into factor the historic movement of prices, which in tandem with the economic parameters, like the changes anticipated in the macroeconomic factors, be it inflation, foreign exchange, the demand supply aspect that is to be seen out playing into any particular time period is taken into account, and then a price projection is derived out of it. So the net output would be a very comprehensive forward-looking price movement that is likely to play out in the near-term future. Now, with the ever so quickly evolving market dynamics, such price forecasting helps in successfully navigating any kind of price fluctuation, which otherwise would impact my overall spending for the next quarter, next 6 months, or even a year of a timeline. And think of this scenario where an enterprise is spending hundreds of millions of dollars in tech outsourcing only. They usually use this data as a strategic tool to make informed procurement decisions as well as optimize their cost structures very well in advance. So that's about the case that we wanted to talk a bit about. Ricky,
And
shall we take a few more questions? Yeah,
yeah, there's just a
few more
question
answers.
from Deb again on this particular case study, and she says, "Is this for forecasting budget-driven allocations?" I presume it is, right?
Yeah. So I think what you're trying to ask is that how does an enterprise use the data? So, right, in terms of a tech outsourcing spend, it could be very specific to a particular vendor landscape. It could be very specific to the services outsourcing landscape. And eventually, it's forecasting for the budget allocation for an enterprise.
Yeah, and not just I mean just for the from a forecasting perspective, right? I mean, in fact, for this particular case studies, right? Because the spend was quite large, right? And there are regular discussions around spend with a lot of their current partners. That's where a lot of discussions around, okay, what should be the increase in the pricing going forward, right? That's where some of the projected price projections that we had provided were used by these enterprises to even kind of look at, okay, how should the price change, right, for from their portfolio, right? So yes, budget allocation, but even to some extent for discussion, right, having a more open discussion about what should be the price change, right? So that's where this was used.
Okay. All right. I think maybe we can take one more questions, and then probably the question is really around. We spoke about the rate card increases or decreases. We spoke about talent. I think we spoke about Gen AI. What are some of the other themes that you estimate to impact pricing this year specifically?
Yeah, so I think one trend definitely that we are seeing probably in the last 3 to 4 months, and we do believe that something that can happen at least in the first or second quarter is definitely rampant discounting, right? So yes, the discounting themes are certainly back. We are seeing it quite prominent now. A lot of service providers, because the overall pipeline that we are seeing, right? Service providers, of course, quite deal hungry, and we are seeing more openness to provide, let's say, a higher discount, or deploy a different mechanism to kind of sweeten the overall deal, right? So we have seen, cases of flat discounting, right, and the BAFO stage, right? And I mean, yes, I mean, some of those were common. It's just that the quantum has certainly increased, right? We've also seen, of course, those, tired discounting structures, right? So, you give us more volume, or, enterprise looking for a, overall consolidation, right? That's where the tiered discounting structure on overall spend, right? Some of those have been deployed. We've also seen cases of COLA waivers, right? As a short-term, discounting mechanism as well, right? So that's one trend definitely that we are seeing. Also, another thing that one needs to definitely look at is the overall macroeconomic and geopolitical development, right? And as an enterprise, you would definitely look at I mean, the broad based price negotiation or increase or decrease, right? That is something that may not work, right, in the current situation, right? The I mean, yes, I mean, overall, if you look at the global economy, right, there is a wider acceptance to the hypothesis that the global recession will not happen. However, if I talk of specific countries, right, there are still in pockets, right, a lot of geographies, like even let's say Germany and others, where the overall economic health would be impacted, right, which eventually would mean a very constrained environment for the enterprise and an overall pricing pressure, right? So that's where a location specific view, something that one needs to look at. We also are seeing a lot of regulation changes by government, like minimum wage revisions, etc. So even that is something that one needs to look into, right? And we already discussed a lot about talent, right? So overall, I think the recommendation would be to kind of look at a surgical view, a location centric view, whenever you're doing the pricing discussion, negotiation, than a overall broad brush view to let's say decrease by 2% or 4%. Yeah, I think that's something that.
Awesome. Think so people who's kind of joined us a bit late at the beginning of the conversation, we had offered that there is a link in the chat on which you can go request a download of a primer, which covers some recent market developments and some very interesting recent deal examples that we've been observing in the market. So feel free to make use of that. And also wanted to share that the pricing index that we've been speaking about for the last 30 odd minutes, that the next version of it will be available on February 22nd. So it is a complimentary download available on the website. So please feel free to make use of that as needed. So any final thoughts, Shitika and Rahul? Thank you so much for joining us today. Any final thoughts before we uh, call it a day?
Yeah, I mean, definitely quite interesting period that we are in, right? And a lot of pressure on the pricing overall, right? And enterprises are looking at. But yes, I think probably a quarter or two, right? We might see some of those, and hopefully, right, things would change, and a lot more deal activity, right? We'll see, right? So some of those can possibly change, right? So we'll again be back with some more news on pricing, right, by then. But yes, quite interesting times.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rahul, Chitika, and thank you so much for all the audience who were very interactive. Thank you for sharing some of your questions. I know we were able to answer those. If not, please feel free to comment on these. We'll definitely get back offline with some responses. And have a great rest of the day or evening, and have a great Valentine's Day ahead. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.